And today we are going to be talking about the invisible industry resources for supporting cannabis entrepreneurs. We hope you find this workshop both useful and thought-provoking, and also a good networking opportunity. My name is Morgan Ritchie-Baum. I'm actually a business librarian with the Greensboro Public Library in Greensboro, North Carolina, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the 2021 ELC Spring Workshop, along with Steve Kramer, who, if you've been here since a little before one, you've already met, and Andrea Lewandowski, who you're going to hear from very soon. But I want to take this moment right at the very beginning to acknowledge and thank the amazing planning group members that we've been so honored to work with to help make this workshop a reality. Carrie Tone from the University of Toronto, Jennifer Snipes from the University of Oregon, John Traska from Every Library, John Weinberg from Spartanburg Community College, Mimi Curley from Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, Ophelia Chapman from UNC Wilmington, Tamika Frowner from Fayetteville State University, Teresa Pfeiffer from Dawnbreaker, Tim Tully from San Diego State University, and Velapon from Fayetteville State University. So welcome to them especially. And even though we have an international planning group, the ELC 2021 Spring Workshop is officially a service of Blink, which is the Business Librarianship in North Carolina, a section of NCLA, the North Carolina Library Association. Before we jump into things, I do just want to put a special shout out for our next workshop. We are going to have two workshops. This is the first. We're going to have one more on November 11th. It's also going to be virtual. And we are planning this one to focus on entrepreneurship, librarians, and anti-racism. So stay tuned to our website for more details about that. But now that you know a little bit about us, I'm going to ask my fellow co-chair Steve to put up a poll just so we can learn a little bit about who is in the room with us. Steve, can you put up the poll? Okay, so you should see a poll here. We just want to learn where you're from. Who do we have in the room? Oh, great. We really do have a little bit of everybody. So this is exciting. I'll wait to see if we can get to at least 95. All right, that's pretty close. All right, yeah, so we've got 56% coming from academic libraries, almost 30% from public, 3% special, 7% coming from the industry, 3% from the nonprofit or an ecosystem partner, and then we have 3% other. So that's pretty exciting. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. Thank you so much for participating. I'll share those results as well, so everybody can see that. So, oh yeah, this is great. We have a nice fun mix. Awesome. Okay. Well, moving on there, thank you for participating. We do want to share that the ELC, if you did not join us for the first conference we had last year, we do have an ELC Code of Conduct. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to share in the chat here so everyone can read through that as they want. But I do want to just shout out two sentences from that code of conduct. Each ELC participant has the right to learn, network, and socialize in an environment of mutual respect and professionalism, free from harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. Creating such an environment is a shared responsibility of everyone involved in the ELC events. And then I'm going to share our contact information. So please contact us, the co-chairs, in Zoom or through email if you believe you've been harassed or that a code of conduct violation does exist. And you can find Steve, Andrew, and myself's contact information right there in the chat. Moving on, we want to also send a special shout out to our sponsors for this event. So thank you to Everlibrary, Mintel, and Privco for their sponsorship. You're going to hear from Mintel in just a moment about the great work they are doing in this space. But Steve, is Dan here from Privco?
Yes, he is.
Great. Dan, I'd like to just invite you for a quick minute here to say a few words of welcome.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Thank you. You can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, everybody. We're very honored to be sponsoring. It's an exciting space for anyone not familiar with what we do. we focus on private company research. We have almost coming up on about 1 million profiles of US-based companies. A lot of these younger, exciting companies are cannabis related. And when I've been doing some research lately, I was familiar with a lot of the food and beverage companies that deal with cannabis, medical cannabis, of course, we all know. But there are these cannabis software companies, just springing up all over the place, getting funded by venture capital firms. Many of them, every week, new companies are popping up. We focus on companies doing at least about 1 million in revenue. So we have around 300 to 400 cannabis related companies in the database. Feel free to reach out to me if you ever want a full list, a spreadsheet, if you're doing more research in this space. But we're excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks for your partnership. So we will actually, we are going to introduce a resource guide here in just a little bit, but content from PrivCo will also be included in the resource guide we will be building together today. I'm now going to invite my fellow co-chair, Andrea, to finish up the rest of the housekeeping and get us started with our first keynote. Andrea?
Great, thank you, Morgan. So to make our event a little more fun, I'd like to let you know about a little contest that we're going to be running today. We're going to lean into today's theme. So during the planning process, we found ourselves inadvertently letting some cannabis puns into our conversations. So today we would like to recognize all of those potential weed-based puns and jokes that we would otherwise try to avoid, since I think that they are unavoidable, especially around this topic. So if you have a pun to submit, you can put it in the chat with the hashtag pun. So for instance, if you feel that being a cannabis entrepreneurship librarian would be a higher calling, you can put that into the chat with hashtag pun. Or maybe if you're concerned that this event is a little too in the weeds, let us know with hashtag pun. And during our discussion period at the close of the event, John Weinberg and I will narrow the submissions and let you vote on your favorites. And we'll announce the winner, who will receive full bragging rights among their best buds. Hashtag pun. So thank you all, and we'll see you in the chat. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Carrie, who is going to share the resources that we're going to be sharing today.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Can you see me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Hey, Sarah. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just share this link for you here. And this is our resource list. I didn't really plan on sharing my screen. Is that okay? Do you guys just want to take your time to open up the link? And you'll see in there, we want to invite everyone to add resources. We will be updating resources as we go through today. So we've already kindly received some suggestions from our various speakers and experts that are here today. And so it's already got started. So please, it just wouldn't be a library workshop without a takeaway of resources and a place to go back afterwards and refer, and hopefully it's a useful list. So this will be available for everyone to access and edit today. And then we'll close it up, we'll kind of clean it up, and then we'll ensure that it's distributed out to everybody who attended. Matt, that is the best. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Carrie. And now to close out our housekeeping protocols. So a little bit more about Zoom and the way things are going to run today. During the speaker talks, please keep yourself muted. The co-hosts will mute attendees whose mics are contributing background noise, but if you could mute yourselves, that would be great. And please keep your video off unless you would like to turn it on when asking a question verbally, so that our speakers are the ones who are visible on camera. Comments and questions are welcome in the chat box along with your puns at any time. However, during the discussion hour at 4:10, please feel free to leave your mics and video on if you would like. So all sessions besides the last discussion hour will be recorded and will be shared. And finally, if we are Zoom hacked, we will shut down the session and email you a new Zoom link immediately. So make sure to keep an eye out for that, but fingers crossed we won't have any issues. If you prefer back channel communication, we invite you to use the hashtag EntreLibCon on Twitter and social media. And now, without any further ado, I'm going to lead things off with our first keynote. So our first keynote speaker is Dr. Michele Scott, Senior Analyst for U.S. Research on Cannabis at Mintel. Michele joined Mintel in 2019 as a Senior Research Analyst reporting on the cannabis industry. She has a PhD in sociology from North Carolina State University and a professional background in market research, where she has analyzed and reported on market trends related to food and beverage, CBD, hemp and cannabis, and health lifestyles. So now I will turn it over to you, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us today.
No, thank you. This is super fun to be back talking to a lot of folks from North Carolina. I obviously spent quite a bit of time in Raleigh, so feels a little bit like coming home, even if it's virtually. I'm going to share my screen, and I have some puns of my own right off the bat, so I'll have to add those here after. Can everyone see everything okay?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, so this is the ABCs of THC and CBD. At Mintel, we kind of attack both together most often, sometimes just CBD. We'll get into a little bit more of that here in a moment. But yes, my name is Michele Scott. I am the US Analyst for Cannabis at Mintel. And just to kind of get things going, to start off at the very beginning, I wanted to talk a little bit about how I get to the insights that I include in my reports. So generally speaking, at Mintel, we talk to consumers through surveys, people over 18, 2,000 respondents per survey. And this is all based off of all of the, big demographics that you might be interested in from a research perspective. We have to change this a little bit for THC and CBD reports. So any report that includes both. We talk to 22 and over consumers for age. Why not 21? Well, we typically ask at least one historical question. So that would be like, what were you doing, or how were you using cannabis a year ago or 3 months ago? And in order to be legally safe, that has to, the consumers have to be 21 at the time the question is asking about. So that's why it's 22. And we only talk to consumers in states where cannabis is recreationally legal at the time of fielding. And any report where this is not the case is going to be very clearly identified. We did have one report last year that was about attitudes about cannabis. So we didn't ask anything about use. We just asked people questions like, would you be okay with a dispensary in your neighborhood? How would you feel if your favorite brand started supporting cannabis legalization or even created a cannabis product? And anybody can have an opinion about cannabis, even if it's not legal to use it in your state. So that was 18 and over, and then the entire US. For CBD only reports, we use the same methodology as all Mintel reports because CBD is federally legal. And then if there's any mention of THC in the questions, we filter those questions specifically, or even the specific response that includes THC per those THC methodologies. And then there are some unique challenges that I face as a cannabis analyst. First and foremost, the market size for cannabis is really challenging to create, and they aren't included in the CBD or in THC reports for that reason, that we just can't have them be reliable enough. Part of this is because sales data for cannabis varies by state and how it's collected. For example, in Alaska, they collect sales data at the agricultural level, so literally like from the farmers. And then in other states, they collect it based off of sales tax. So obviously two very different points in the supply chain that are impossible to compare and contrast. We also require 5 years of historical data for forecasts. And because cannabis has not been legal in all states for at least 5 years, there simply isn't that data to go off of, which again makes it difficult to include the forecasts and reports. And then the last point in terms of market sizing, obviously there is market sizing data out there. Mintel is one of the only non-cannabis organizations that reports on the cannabis industry in the way that we do. And a lot of the market sizing out there is very optimistic. At Mintel, we do not have a vested interest in whether or not cannabis companies succeed. My job is more to present organizations with the best information possible and then allow them to make decisions based on that information, versus a cannabis organization wants you to invest in cannabis. They have an interest in presenting it as a market that's going to continue to thrive and boom. And certainly not to say that I think the cannabis industry is going to falter somehow, but again, I think some of those estimates are a little optimistic. The second major challenge I face is that brand information is really disorganized. A lot of the data sources that other analysts at Mintel might use for consumer packaged good research don't carry THC data because of the legal complications. And this means that a lot of my desk research starts off in online research, which we know is unreliable, can be outdated and complicated by algorithms. If I'm using Instagram to identify brand launches, that's going to depend on what I've clicked on over the last weeks or months on what I'm going to see. So it requires a little bit more time and a little bit more of a judicious eye in terms of how that information is used. And then finally, one of the challenges I face is that my sample sizes are just really small, which means some data cuts can't be used in a statistically significant way. A really great example of this is region, because we know more southern states have not passed federal or have not passed statewide legalization. So if I was to cut data by region, you would see the data skewed because of that, and it wouldn't be a useful data point in that way. Because my base sizes are smaller, there are also some extended analyses that our data team is unable to run on cannabis data, which is a shame. We have a really great data team, and a lot of those tools are really fun. They just need a bigger base size in order to be able to run that math. And then here, before we get into the consumer data, this is legal status by state. We have the recreationally legal states on the left, which includes medical use. Any state that has recreational legality also has medical legality, with the big difference being you still need a medical card for medical use. This often provides some benefits like being able to cut line if there is a line, or having different taxation structures in place. So you might be able to get your medicine for less expensive because you aren't taxed at the recreational level. And then the medical only states, you have to have a medical card, so essentially a very formal doctor's note to use cannabis. Alabama being the most recent addition to this list within the last couple of weeks. And they have a really interesting set of restrictions on medical use. No flower, so nothing inhalable is legal, and edibles aren't legal. So this essentially leaves pills and tinctures or drops, which more closely reflect a typical pharmaceutical drug versus a more recreational cannabis product. And so I think that's something really interesting. And then the library as a whole. There are three common refrains that you are going to come across regardless of which one of my reports you're in. This is a good thing, I think. It means I'm on the right track when I'm making predictions and analyses, and hopefully I'm able to present it in a way that isn't too tedious and boring. But the first one you're going to see come up is that education is a limitation, but also a huge opportunity. Only about half of consumers know the difference between THC, CBD, and hemp. So THC being the psychoactive component responsible for that high that you feel when you use a product. CBD having slight mind-altering qualities, so something that might make you feel more calm or sleepy, or even perhaps just the absence of symptoms like anxiety. So you might feel totally normal, but you didn't have a panic attack today or something like that. And then hemp, which is either a textile, a beauty product, or personal care product, or a food. Has really great benefits in terms of being a plant-based protein or moisturizing, but it's not going to affect your mental state in any shape, way, or form. Obviously, if consumers are confused about the differences between these three products, that's going to impact their experience and could even be dangerous. So something that's really important for brands to help educate on. The second key takeaway is going to be that all of these regulations we've touched on so far demand really nimble thinking on brands. One big issue is that cannabis cannot be legally transported from state to state, even if both states are recreationally legal. And the cannabis laws vary tremendously by state and municipality. So I'm in the Chicago suburbs, and if I was to go to a dispensary in my immediate area, I'm going to have a different experience than if I go to Chicago proper. And that could be something from the products I find to how much I pay going out the door because the taxation is different. And then if I go to California or Washington State, an even bigger difference, especially in terms of what brands I would find. The third, and I think perhaps the most important takeaway, is that cannabis consumers are just like us because they are us. So this is important because it means that any consumer trend you find in any category, cannabis or otherwise, is going to be visible in each of the subcategories that I talk about in cannabis reports. This makes cannabis reports really useful for cannabis brands, obviously, but also cannabis adjacent brands. So that might be someone making the accessories used to consume cannabis products, or brands simply hoping to connect with the cannabis community. So this could be Ben & Jerry's, who's very famously connected to cannabis and cannabis issues. It could be Taco Bell, or it could be Scott's Miracle-Gro, who released a really lengthy statement last year in support of federal legalization, not because they have any intention of releasing a cannabis product themselves, but because they make fertilizer, and cannabis is ultimately a plant. So obviously, they're interested in anything that might require fertilizer, right? So switching gears a little bit, the next section is going to be the consumer data that we feature in the reports, and just some key takeaways from those in a more direct fashion. So to start off, we have some demographics here. I think an important thing to note right off the bat is that these are indices and not percentages. So for what this means is that an index of 110 means the demographic in question is 10% more likely than the general population to be represented. 90 means they're 10% less. So what we know about who cannabis consumers are and what that group looks like, they tend to be young, specifically young men, and then also not represented in this chart just for legibility's sake. Cannabis consumers also skew non-white, urban, low to middle income, and are more likely to be parents. The parents point is interesting. I think a lot of that has to do with just the age group. But if you look at parents in some of the different categories, their behavior is a little bit different. So format is shaped, don't see a lot of bongs in homes with small children. And it also affects how people interact at the dispensary. So whether or not like they plan their trips. Okay, and let me move my toolbar here. So relaxation, one of the biggest use cases for cannabis. And I think this is partly because this is where PR has been focused most. But this chart breaks down the difference between folks who have a medical card and folks who don't have a medical card, regardless of if they're in a state that has like recreational use. So I think the obvious things here, fun and medical condition, it's not super surprising that people with a medical card are less likely to use for fun, and they're more likely to have a medical condition they're treating. But relaxation, stress relief, and improved sleep are consistently the top 3 uses for cannabis across demographic, across medical card status, across category, format, and over time. So this is something that they might change order depending on what you're talking about specifically, but these are the big 3. And typically when I talk about these, I refer to these as either subclinical uses or medical-ish, with the point being that even folks who are using in a recreational way are still treating cannabis as some type of therapeutic product. It's not necessarily something they're using when they go out at night or when they have a party, which is really important when we're talking about cannabis stereotypes and the dangers of those. And again, the danger of stereotypes, most of them are misguided. If we're going to engage with cannabis's most frequent user base, we need to be really careful with how we talk about them and the assumptions we make. Just under half do use cannabis once a day or more, which is very frequent. But we know that overall 77% of consumers are using cannabis in the evening, and 68% are using alone. And those that are using with other people around, these tend to be people that live in their home. And what this tells us is those subclinical uses really are the key takeaway about cannabis use. People are using to de-stress after a long day. they're using to get better sleep. And if they're using once a day or more, they're trying to kind of get some of those effects throughout the day. So if it's something like stress relief or anti-anxiety, those aren't issues that only matter at night. I think a lot of us might wait until the evening to de-stress, but if you really do have a subclinical stress issue, using what people refer to often as a microdose throughout the day can be a really effective way to engage that therapy. And then we see cannabis use growing. We expect this to continue to grow, especially as more states legalize cannabis. All of the big jumps in cannabis use sync with new states coming online, which makes sense, right? I think the other important thing to look at in this year-to-year comparison is the folks who are open to use but are not necessarily using yet. Obviously, a huge target market for brands to help kind of move those consumers from interest to trial. And then to dig into that data a little bit more, what we saw in 2020 was that heavy users stayed the same, but the category of people who are using multiple times a day went up. So at Mintel, heavy use is a roll up of everyday users and multiple times a day users. We see that everyday use went down and multiple times a day use went up. So what this tells us is that people who were already comfortable with cannabis, they knew what they liked, they felt comfortable with dosing, they were comfortable with side effects, increased their use in 2020. Probably not hugely shocking to anyone. I think we all were stressed out last year. We were all stuck at home, maybe a little bored, or if we were busy because of different pandemic stressors and changes in family dynamics and work, stress still is increasing, right? So whatever your stress increase was, it happened in 2020. And a lot of people were using cannabis as a way to help manage this. An important note here, this is going to be something that, fingers crossed as vaccines continue to roll out and we move into our next normal, whatever that looks like, and the acute stressors of 2020 dissipate, brands are going to have to think about how they can still reach users and the potential new users without this, kind of madness that we experienced last year. Again, fingers crossed, I don't think anybody, cannabis company or otherwise, is hoping that that continues. So we do see more specifically that COVID-19 spurred cannabis use when it came to stress, when it came for the need for relaxation, and when it came for the need to improve mood. Again, I don't think this data is shocking, but I think it is important when we think about what the next increases in use and the next kind of generation of new cannabis users are going to look like, how to best reach them without this COVID-19 stress looming in the background. And I did mention at the very beginning, one of our reports that was all attitudinal. This data is from that report. So we asked, how have your opinions on cannabis changed since 2016? So essentially a legislative cycle. And 41% said they had a positive change in opinion towards recreational use. 64% said the same thing about medical use. And this tracks with general thoughts and feelings about the difference between the two. People are always more open to medical cannabis. So really important for brands and people in the industry to communicate that message that even recreational users are using for medical-ish reasons, because that's going to help win over people who maybe aren't interested but are going to be critical in passing legislation. And we also know that consumers think positively about cannabis as a potential solve for economic problems. And again, in a post-COVID, fingers crossed, someday post-COVID world, there are still going to be lingering economic challenges. And we've already seen some states get on board with really pushing legalization quickly to help bridge those gaps. And
excuse me, Michelle.
Yes.
I'm just jumping in to tell you that there's 10 minutes remaining.
Okay, yeah, we're almost done.
Okay.
I'll go through the last parts quickly. So CBD, not a passing fad. It's going to be around too. Mental health, still hugely important, but it's also still a really complicated product. And this is because it's not federally legal for use in food and drink. The FDA has a crackdown, not super recently, Again, they were pretty busy in 2020, but this is something we predict will happen again in the coming years. So something to look out for. And then also in terms of COVID-19 spiking sales, one of the interesting points we saw is that recreation became an increased use. So this might have even a little bit more to do with how we defined recreation in the middle of lockdown, but something to keep an eye on going forward. And then the final thing that I have is just some brand spotlights. Again, I'll touch on these very quickly. These 3 products really represent some important things going on in the cannabis space. Mindy's Edibles, which is a gourmet take on edible products. Candescent, which you see here is a flight. So they have 5 different products, all pre-rolls, but 5 different flower strains in this product, kind of a sampler, but also color coded by effect. So you see here that the products are named by the effect that you're going to get. And then this is a screenshot from Kiva Confections, where users can use a drop-down menu to choose the effect they're looking for and then be directed to a product that fits that need. So something that helps with that education aspect. And then finally, CBD, we have Happy Dance, Laura Jones, and Gron. Happy Dance uses the celebrity endorsement. This is Kristen Bell's line. Laura Jones is a more exclusive high-end CBD product line with a really broad product base, truly something for everyone if you can afford it. And then Gron, this is a sampler pack of 2 of their chocolates, one for daytime use, Calm, and one for nighttime use, Snooze, that both rely on other functional ingredients like adaptogens to kind of boost the effects of CBD. So that's all I have for today. I will definitely open it up for questions. We do have a link here if you'd like to download the slides from Mintel. You can do that and have all of this information if any of this was a little bit too fast, especially there towards the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Michele. And Tim Tully has been monitoring chat, so I'll turn it over to him. There were a few questions that came through.
Yeah, so far I feel like it was more comments than questions, but there was one pretty interesting question so far, and it was about tracking the change in use patterns due to COVID. And the question was, have you monitored or seen any patterns for parent users, and if usage went up or down during the pandemic while the kids were home from school?
That's a really great question. Off the top of my head, I don't know if I have looked at that specific data cut recently enough to quote it. I know we did have a COVID specific question in the CBD and health report that just published. So that is something I could look at in terms of that. And then there's another analyst that writes a cannabis and health report every year. She is in charge of the health library, so it kind of lives in both spaces. And that's something that I could look at her report too, if that's something I could update y'all on later.
All right. The only other question I see 2 more questions. One is about Mintel subscriptions to public libraries, which I'm aware Brooklyn Public Library has a subscription, and that will probably be something that maybe one of the account managers could follow up on. But also the other question was, is there any data on Cbd pet products, which is something that my mom's dog takes, and is there regulatory differences there?
That's a great question. I am writing the CBD and pets report right now. That's my next report that I'll publish. So it's a really interesting and complicated topic, and it's really difficult to write about because the regulations are different. They are not approved by the FDA. I don't know enough about the legality of it to really understand how they're on shelves then, but the governing bodies of the people who license veterinarians, their stance currently is that veterinarians are not allowed to recommend CBD. They're not allowed to sell it. They're not allowed to list it as a therapy for animals.
5 minutes remaining.
Obviously, if you go to PetSmart, they're on the shelves. So it is a really tricky space for, I think, consumers and brands both to navigate.
Bro, what's going on?
What's good with you, bro? How you feel, man?
All right, so so far we only have one other question in the chat, and that's how will Mintel's research be evolving in the future on this topic? What are some of the future directions that you're looking and moving in addition to the PET analysis?
So the new reports this year were, one was packaging, and that's already published. One was pets, and then the last is the December report, which is about profiles of the cannabis consumer. And that will set us up really nicely for the next season of report titles, which we don't have finalized yet, but it'll allow us to talk about consumers in a little bit more of a nuanced way, and exactly like what that says, to communicate some different profiles or categories that different users might fit into, whether that is who the daily user looks like in terms of their interests outside of cannabis, or who the interested non-users are, things like that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And final call for any questions in the chat. You can go ahead and put those in. But then if there are questions after this session or that you think of later, Michele, I believe you said that you were going to be joining for our discussion time later on today.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. So you can save them for there too. And because we have a little bit of extra time and I missed your pun at the start of the presentation, do you have a favorite pun?
I always joke that this is the hardest part of my job because I am so bad at puns. And so I have regularly Googled like cannabis puns to try to come up with titles for things. I think hitting the high notes is always a really good one that kind of works for any key takeaway session. That feels lazy and obvious, but I think that's probably a favorite.
Very good. All right, well, thank you once more. We really appreciate all of this information, and it must be a difficult topic to keep up on given the different status around the country and all of that. So thank you for making it, hitting the high notes to take that. So we have a couple minutes until our second keynote, but Morgan, I'm going to turn it